Estimates of Roman soldiers killed at the Battle of Cannae range from at least 45,000 to as many as 70,000. Some modern historians offer a more conservative estimate of around 40,000 to 50,000. On the Roman side, Consul Lucius Aemilius Paullus commanded the right wing, while Gaius Terentius Varro commanded the left. In the center stood Proconsul Servilius, senators and staff officers. During the battle, Varro escaped before the encirclement completely closed, but Paullus and Servilius fought to the end and were killed. Minucius, who had been famous as the former dictator Fabius's lieutenant, also died. It is said that about 80 senators lost their lives in this battle as well. Rome had never suffered such a catastrophic defeat in a single engagement. The Battle of Cannae is recorded as the worst disaster in the history of the Roman Republic.
On the day of the battle, the official command belonged to Consul Gaius Terentius Varro. As has often been mentioned, Roman consuls alternated overall command on a daily basis. All sources consistently confirm that Varro held command on the day of the battle. However, many scholars believe that the actual tactical command was exercised by Paullus. Traditionally, in the Roman army, the commander-in-chief took charge of the right wing, and all sources report that Paullus commanded the right Cannae. From this, we may infer that although Varro held formal supreme authority that day, the practical conduct of the battle was directed by Paullus. Some scholars, however, argue that depending on circumstances, the supreme commander could take the left wing, and thus they dispute this interpretation.
Paullus, gravely wounded during the battle, was sitting propped against a pile of stones when a subordinate officer urged him to flee. But he replied, "Do you want to see me survive in disgrace and stand trial?" and ordered his subordinate to escape alone. Although Roman custom did not hold defeated commanders legally responsible, Paullus still regarded himself as someone who deserved to face judgment. This final statement vividly reflects his sense of responsibility and Roman ideals of honor. To illustrate how deeply Romans valued honor, let us look at one compelling example.
About 300 years earlier, Sextus, son of the Tarquin royal family, threatened the married woman Lucretia with a sword and attempted to rape her. She was not afraid of death and resisted to the end. Sextus then threatened, "I will kill you and your servant, and claim I caught you in adultery." Fearing that her family's honor would be stained, Lucretia ceased resisting. Afterward, she summoned her family, begged them to avenge her, and took her own life. This incident ultimately led to the downfall of the Roman monarchy. Lucretia did not fear death itself, but she could not bear the thought of her own and her family's honor being defiled. Her story is a representative example of how absolute a value honor was in Roman society.
Paullus, like Lucretia, or rather like all Romans, was a person who placed great importance on honor. In other words, even though the official command on that day belonged to Varro, Paullus assumed responsibility for the defeat as the one who effectively led the army. Varro, on the other hand, fled during the battle, despite being the commander of the day. It was as if a ship's captain had abandoned his crew on a sinking vessel. What is even more astonishing is that the Roman Senate and people warmly welcomed Varro despite such shameless behavior. In a normal Roman society, someone would have found a pretext, any pretext, to impeach Varro and bring him to trial.
A similar example can be found about 33 years earlier, in the Battle of Drepana, where the Roman consul Publius Claudius Pulcher suffered a crushing defeat. Rome did not hold him accountable for losing the battle. However, he was punished for impiety. He had neglected the sacred auspices that were supposed to be performed for the engagement, thereby violating holy religious rites. As a result, he was heavily fined, and his political career effectively came to an end. According to some accounts, he eventually took his own life. Yet had he won the battle, it is highly likely that he would have faced no punishment at all. The Romans might even have praised him, saying, "Even the gods showed him favor." In essence, the authorities simply attached a different pretext to punish him for the defeat. Although Pulcher was of noble birth, his politics were closer to the populares, and thus he had many enemies in the Senate. Varro, by contrast, was a plebeian with no aristocratic background whatsoever.
But the fact that no one impeached Varro and instead welcomed him back suggests that he bore no real responsibility. Varro was a normal Roman citizen. Had he held genuine responsibility as commander on the day of the battle, he too would have chosen to die in action. Even if he had managed to escape and survive, suicide, or at the very least permanent withdrawal from public life, would have been the Romans' proper course. Yet Varro walked openly in public, later held several offices, and died a natural death. A man truly responsible for such a defeat could never have lived such a life. Therefore, Varro's behavior itself is evidence that he did not bear actual responsibility. If he bore none, then he had every reason to escape and survive. The nation needed every capable leader it could spare in order to rebuild.
Why then did Varro not exercise command? Rome had virtually staked the fate of the Republic on the Battle of Cannae. Consul Paullus had already proven himself 3 years earlier when he led Rome to victory in the Second Illyrian War. Some scholars argue that the formation adopted by the Roman army at Cannae matches Paulus's known tactical preferences. Varro, by contrast, had almost no significant military experience. Thus, it was a natural choice for Paullus to take charge. This may have been Paulus's own insistence, or it may have been a consensus reached during the war council. Simply put, because the very survival of Rome was at stake, the prevailing opinion would have been, let the experienced Paullus command. Varro likely accepted this judgment for the greater good, placing the nation's victory above his personal honor.
Let us next consider why Varro became a scapegoat. About 50 years after Varro's death, the Greek historian Polybius began writing his histories.
Make way for
Polybius
the
lived in Rome as a hostage and was supported by Scipio Aemilianus. Scipio's maternal grandfather was Aemilius Paullus, who had fallen at Cannae, and his adoptive grandfather was Scipio Africanus, the conqueror of Hannibal. Given this background, it is reasonable to assume that Polybius was sympathetic to the Paullus family. Therefore, it has been suggested that Polybius may have placed the blame for the disaster on Varro. Varro, already long dead, could no longer defend himself. Books were rare and expensive, and ordinary plebeians had no access to them. They could not challenge the narrative even if they wished. In this context, Varro may have ended up as a scapegoat. Of course, this remains only a plausible suspicion, not an established fact. Without clear contrary sources or a time machine, the full truth can never be definitively known.
About 100 years after the death of Polybius, Livy wrote his History of Rome. Livy presented an even more biased perspective than Polybius. He consistently depicted patrician consuls as dignified, prudent, and capable, while portraying plebeian consuls as hot-tempered, arrogant, and incompetent. This shows that Livy adopted a patrician-centered viewpoint. Moreover, his History of Rome had a strong didactic purpose, emphasizing Rome's moral and political lessons. As part of this structure, patrician consuls were presented as symbols of virtue, prudence, and wisdom, while plebeian consuls were depicted as sources of rashness, arrogance, and failure. By crafting a contrasting narrative framework, he aimed to convey moral lessons to his readers. Thus, it was only natural that he uncritically accepted Polybius's account, assigning blame for the defeat at Cannae to Varro. With the two most influential ancient historians both placing responsibility on him, Varro became permanently branded in history as a shameless defeated commander.
Now let us move on to the next story. After the great victory at Cannae, Hannibal's cavalry commander Maharbal urged an immediate march on Rome. He believed that, with Rome's main army effectively annihilated, this was the perfect moment to strike and capture the city. But Hannibal did not make an immediate decision. He refused the proposal, saying that he needed time to deliberate. Maharbal's remark at this moment is famous. Hannibal knows how to win a victory, but not how to use it. This anecdote is reported by the ancient historian Livy, but some scholars believe it may have been embellished. In reality, given Hannibal's circumstances, a direct march on Rome was impossible. Though victorious, Hannibal's forces had also suffered considerable losses.
Most importantly, none of Rome's Italian allies had yet defected at the time. While several cities began to abandon Rome in the months following Cannae, immediately after the battle, no city had moved. Only a year earlier, Hannibal had annihilated a Roman army at Lake Trasimene and then attempted to attack the small Umbrian town of Spoletium. But, lacking siege equipment, he attempted a direct assault and was repelled by strong walls, suffering significant casualties before withdrawing. That experience must have taught him an important lesson. If he could not take Spoletium, it was unrealistic to think he could storm Rome's massive fortifications by force. Hannibal understood this well. For that reason, instead of marching on Rome, he reorganized his army and pursued his original strategy of encouraging Rome's allied cities to defect. That is all for today. See you in the next episode, and thank you for watching.